Pratmesh sent me a brief on what has been discussed so far, and that was quite useful. And if there's anything that you need to raise from that, which I'm able to respond to, I will. But then I can't hear you. But perhaps on my WhatsApp, it can be sent. I learned that the editors on media session entail discussion of the lack of representation of marginalized communities in editorial positions, and that the voices of the oppressed were not being heard in the mainstream media, and their work has not been given enough recognition. Atrocities against these voices were heard only when some atrocities against minorities had to be covered. Focus always on victims, and this was one of the themes that emerged from that session, or that discussion. There was a discussion about the algorithm rules, how they become crucial and how they're being manipulated, and what a challenge it is. And references were made to digital fascism. The key question of diversity in the newsroom was apparently discussed, and there's a marked failure to build in inclusivity in the newsrooms, and how journalists' voices were, insufficiently heard. There was no democracy of information, which the dawn of the internet was supposed to bring. The stories of Bahujans and minorities are largely left unheard. And journalists from these suppressed or oppressed communities enter the newsroom, they are stereotyped and used as tokens of representation. These were some of the issues involved. And then I was told there's a final session on the repression unleashed against journalists and the challenges they face today, risk to life, limb, and liberty, so to speak. So these are what I got a brief from Pratmesh about this. But what I plan to give, or propose to give in the next 20 minutes or so, is an overview of the changes that have been taken in the media ecosystem, the Indian news media ecosystem, from the time I entered journalism as a reporter in the mid-1960s. Actually, the second half of the 1960s is when I began to work seriously as a journalist. We have, people of my generation have witnessed several transitions, some transformations also from the time we started out over that period of over 50 years. It's 55 years or so. And there have been technological transformations. The move from hot lead type to photo composition, and then the age of the computers and the internet. I don't want to go into these details. And also on the printing side, production side, there have been many changes, including the use of color scanning, and new types of printing, fast-speed printing presses, and so on. I'm speaking largely about the press. When we started out, there was All India Radio and Doordarshan, but they were largely, although I think All India Radio did perform a valuable role in taking classical music and folk music and so on, and also featuring other things. And there's a very useful farmers program, which I think was followed widely. So there were some good things on the government-controlled media, but basically they were non-independent when it came to politics and current affairs and anything to do with the government. So that was the picture when we started out. I remember that the press had a high reputation because it had emerged from the freedom struggle and developed quite a lot. Newspaper circulations were quite small in comparison with what they are today, but they seem to have a lot of influence. Not, of course, in various Indian languages. They did not have independent influence, I would say, but in combination with socio-political movements, the freedom struggle, struggles for reform, radical movements, revolutionary movements. So in concert with those, or in combination with those, I think the influence was much valued. And when you wrote an editorial, I think the policymakers at least paid attention. And a certain section of the intelligentsia you could reach if it was in English or it was in Indian language, it was more broader. But the English language press was more developed in terms of adoption of technology, in the kind of information it got, in the remuneration paid to journalists, and general influence. From that, then you had the emergency when the whole thing changed. There was censorship, but after the 2.5 years between 1975 and 77, when the emergency regime was defeated peacefully in a general election in 1977, that was the period where the media, the news media, and particularly the Indian language press took off. Television was still in its early days, yet to make a big impact, but the press in various Indian languages took off. And the Australian political journal scientist, Robin Jeffrey, has studied this in great depth, particularly the Indian language press, their growth, what are the engines for their growth, what are the movements they covered, what are the challenges and problems they faced. So in his book called India's Newspaper Revolution, on that. So that was the age. And then television came on the scene, news television. There were some good things on television, starting with, I think the first 24/7 was Asianet, where my friend Sashikumar, pioneered, and he partnering with the government to cable the whole state of Kerala. That was the first, and then you had some very good, worthwhile programs in NDTV and various other channels. And so these were the two main platforms on which journalists could put out their best efforts. And it was a period of, I would say, it was once the creative energies were released through the defeat of the emergency regime, I think that is a very good period for the press, mainly the print press for the first part, but later on television as well. And this, I think, meant that there was a lot of investigative journalism during this period, right up to the early 90s. You had stories by Arun Shourie in the Indian Express and those around him. I was involved in the Bofors investigation and led it. And several other stories were published, not just on corruption, but on livelihood, on hunger, on starvation deaths. Frontline magazine did some very good investigations on starvation deaths in the coastal region of Andhra Pradesh, where a number of weavers and their families died of sheer starvation. So these issues were, I think, were covered quite well. Not right across the media, but there was enough to showcase this kind of people-oriented journalism and journalism that fought misdeeds, corruption, and so on. Now, let's sit back and look at what are the roles that serious journalism plays. Prathamesh wanted me to say a little about this. I think a study of the history of the Indian press, going back more than 2 centuries, 2.5 centuries, if you like, but seriously, more than 2 centuries, suggests that the press, the relatively independent press, especially the press that was involved with the freedom struggle, because there's another one which supported the British, the press played, or newspapers played, 2 extremely valuable central functions or roles. What are these roles? One is the credible information function. It's an information function, but it has to be credible. It has to be believable. It can't be just false propaganda. It can't be fake. And this could be recognized by serious readers, the credible information function. But that's not enough. It's not just enough to report and give basic facts in the media. There had to be a second function, which in a sense is more important, a critical adversarial role. A critical adversarial role. This role, a critical role, it looks at the performance of all institutions, the performance of governments at the center and in the states and at the local level, business houses, where the bureaucracy, the judiciary, and so on, in a critical way. By critical, we don't mean just negative, but exercising your critical faculties to see what is right and what is wrong, what is sound and what is not, what is corrupt and what is not, what helps the people and what harms them, and so on. A critical approach is very important to this. And when you do that, very often you investigate. There's nothing sacrosanct about or superior about investigative journalism, but basically investigative journalism is a systematic attempt to discover facts that are concealed either inadvertently or deliberately through a cover-up. And various things came out, and that period I mentioned, post 1977 or let's say the mid 1990s, perhaps even the late 1990s to an extent, I think that was a very encouraging and inspiring period for the press. Initially, mainly the printed newspapers, and later on news television, which took off in a big way in India, and I think initially showed a lot of promise. And as I said, even the state-controlled media, while they did a lot of propaganda when it came to sensitive political issues relating to the government or governance, but it did play some kind of positive role on issues relating to, say, farmers, giving them information and taking culture and the performing arts, which are non-controversial, as we have seen there, to large sections of the people, because All India Radio was built one of the world's great radio networks right across the country. So I wouldn't underestimate the role they played, although when it came to political issues, sensitive political issues, or issues concerning people's struggles, it was completely used as a propaganda arm of the government. And from that, there have been revolutionary transformations, technological transformations, with the arrival of the internet. And I want to say a few words on that. The arrival of the internet was initially welcomed by everybody, the digital age, because it appeared that news now had escaped the control of a few and got out into the public realm. And there was a lot of references, a lot of discussion on citizen journalism, that everybody could be a journalist and so forth. There are many articles are written during this period, but today we have a somewhat, at least I have, and many people, I share this with many people, they have a more somber view of what social media do. And the point here is about the polluted global information ecosystem, where disinformation, especially online disinformation, is rampant. As we all know, disinformation does not respect national borders. And as media practitioners or as journalists, we must make a clear and actionable differentiation between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is deliberate and motivated. Misinformation is not deliberate, not intentional, and typically, so far as journalists are concerned, it is a result of reporting or editing failure, and therefore, if you are conscientious, if you have integrity in the new media organization, you need to correct it, and you can correct it easily if misinformation. Because once it's spotted, once it's pointed out, your duty is to correct it in your newspaper or digital platform or on television. But this is rarely done in India. But what I'm primarily concerned with is disinformation. Both types of false information do harm, even significant harm, but it is disinformation. Remember, it's deliberate, it's motivated, it's scaled up and weaponized on the search, messaging, and social networking platforms operated by the big so-called technology companies. It is that presents the major challenge and threat to democracy, to media credibility, and in charged socio-economic or socio-political settings, to human life, limbs, and welfare as well. And in countering the menace of toxic disinformation, professional journalism, which is first and foremost the discipline of fact-checking and verification, has a great opportunity to demonstrate its indispensability. This is where professional journalism has a great opportunity today to show itself as an effective counter to disinformation, which is scaled up on the social media platforms, and show that it is a power, it's a force for the social good, and particularly taking up the interests or safeguarding the interests or articulating the interests of the working people and the most oppressed sections of society. And I think this is very important. But returning to the functions, I refer to the credible information function and the critical adversarial function, investigative function, and so on. Those are the two central functions. But there are also valuable derivatives that of these two central functions. And the first derivative is the agency of the press in public education, agency of the media as a whole in public education, that we seek to inform and educate people, general readers, on a number of things, on economics, on politics, on science and technology, on the arts, on culture, on literature, and so on, without talking down to them, without being condescending. This is a valuable function, that a role in public education. And I think there's tremendous potential here, and this potential is hardly realized. We just don't do enough by way of what we can do in this regard. And another derivative of the two central functions is to serve as a critical forum for analysis, disputation, and comment. And the American playwright Arthur Miller once talked about what this function, this critical forum is. He said, and I quote, "A good newspaper, I suppose, is a nation talking to itself. If you like, a society talking to itself." That's the function that is. And a third derivative is agenda building for worthwhile causes, that all children should be of school-going age, should be in school and not part of the workforce, that malnutrition should be combated, that mass deprivation should be addressed as a priority issue, mass deprivations. India has a greater mass of multiple deprivations, socioeconomic deprivations, cultural deprivations, environmental deprivations than any other country in the world. We are not the most backward. We are not the least developed. We are, in many respects, advances have been made in science and technology, in space, in industry, in agriculture, in various other fields, in research. But when it comes to eliminating the curse of mass poverty and deprivation, I think India ranks very poorly among countries of the world. And there is yet another function, which is a negative function, and that is the propaganda function, that manufacturing of consent for the policies, for the establishment policies, on which Chomsky and Herman and various others have written a great deal. So this is my framework. When you ask what are the roles that serious journalism can play or its functions, the worthwhile functions, this is my own framework. And others have spoken, people like George Brock, on what can be a foundation on which journalism in the 20th century can be rebuilt. He's proposed the following 4 tasks: verification, sense-making, bearing witness, and investigation. These 4. This is not exhaustive, but these are valuable tasks. These are important tasks that if you respond to these tasks, if you fulfill these tasks, then I think you'll do very well in this analysis for journalism in the 21st century. Verification, sense-making, bearing witness, and investigation. Now, on the question of representation, I think we need more research, more data. I think there's a need to collect data on the socio-economic, and which includes caste backgrounds of people working in right across the media. It's not very difficult because there are unions of journalists, there are various other bodies, press clubs, and so on. And it should not be difficult if a systematic effort is made to do this. We need to map the media in this respect, right across newspapers, television channels, and as well as digital-only new ventures, the smaller ventures, and so on. And the representation of women, you see many more women on the editorial desks. But when you ask the question, how many of them are in senior positions or right at the top, there may be a few. But overall, there is a tremendous underrepresentation of women. If you ask the question, how many Muslims are in newsroom, there could be states where there are several. But overall, the picture in relation to the population of, say, 15%, 14 to 15% of the national population, what is their share in journalistic jobs in various categories? If you look at that, I think a disappointing picture is surely going to emerge. And if you look at Dalits, the newsroom, I think Sainath and others wrote earlier some years ago on the shameful underrepresentation of people from scheduled castes and tribes, very, very few from tribes, scheduled tribes. I think that information has to be brought out, because on the issue that was discussed earlier today in some of your sessions, I think this came up, the lack of inclusivity, a lack of diversity, not hearing the voices, stereotyping people, a few who have come in and using them as tokens of representation. This should be eliminated. This should be changed, because unless you have a diverse newsroom and diverse body of journalists in any media organization and right across the industry, you're not going to get very good journalism. Finally, we come to the most pressing issue today. The vicious and sweeping Delhi police raids on the offices of NewsClick and the residences of virtually anyone associated with it, the indiscriminate seizure of the electronic devices of journalists and other employees without adhering to due process, such as the provision of seizure memos, hash values of the seized data, or even copies of the data, the sealing of the news portal's main office, the arrest and detention of its founder editor Prabir Purkasta and its administrative head Amit Chakravarti on terrorism-related charges. And as though all this were not enough, the searches conducted at the premises of NewsClick and the home of its founder after a fresh criminal case was filed by the CBI, the fifth probe agency directed from above, from the political bosses, to set about this medium-sized digital news operations. I think this marks the lowest point for media freedom in India since the emergency of 1975-77. And there's every indication that the post-2014 downslide, which has seen India sink to the rank of 161 among 180 countries and territories in the World Press Freedom Index 2023, published by Reporters Without Borders. This downslide is likely to continue. The only thing that can halt it is organized and effective resistance and smart, sustained collective action at various levels, professional, legal, and political. There's no need to go into the details of this. This has been well published. What happened after the New York Times published a lousy piece of journalism and how that triggered a McCarthyite campaign against NewsClick and in particular the two, Prabir and Amit. That's well known, and I don't have to go into this. But this is a very serious matter. The good thing is, the bright spot here is, there have been widespread protests across the country by journalists, lawyers, political and social activists, and members of the public against what happened on October 3rd and day after. Newspaper, in fact, the Press Club of India in Delhi on the 14th, in the evening of the 14th, there was a very, very well-attended meeting where Prabir's book on the good fight was launched, connecting his experience as somebody who had been detained under mistaken identity during the emergency, spent a whole year, and then now, connecting these two experiences in an interesting way. And that book was published. I think there was a very, very engaged audience and a lot of solidarity. Press clubs, organizations of working journalists, professional bodies, including the Editors Guild of India, DigiPub, and the Network of Women in Media India, and also the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists. They have all registered their condemnation. And this collective actions in solidarity with NewsClick and its journalists have been quite heartening. Equally important, the matter has been taken to court with wholehearted support from some of India's top lawyers who have appeared pro bono in these cases. But we are clear about one thing: this is not enough. The campaign to defend media independence and freedom cannot succeed if it is episodic. Repression by the state can be resisted and faced down in various ways. But the real challenge today is to sustain and develop the campaign in a toxic information ecosystem where disinformation and the politics of hate run riot. Anti-people politics run riot in social media, on political platforms, and in some sections of the the mainstream media as well, particularly two notorious television channels. I won't name them, but everybody is familiar with their role today. But this is not all. Since May 2014, 19 Indian journalists have been murdered in connection with their work. And this is a larger number than in the previous decade. And equally shamefully, the killers have not been brought to justice. So much so that India remains a permanent member of the Club of Shame known as the Global Impunity Index, which is compiled year after year by the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists. And according to a recently published article in The Wire, 16 journalists have been charged under the UAPA, that is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. It's 7 of them behind bars, 8 out on bail, and 1 not arrested. The situation in Jammu and Kashmir is appalling. And there is a reign of terror there against anyone who resists, but also in our case of special interest, against journalists, even journalists with very moderate views, but journalists who are doing their independent job. They are being detained and maltreated in overcrowded prisons and also various other forms of maltreatment. And the situation, by all accounts, in the current Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir is appalling beyond words. It's worse than an emergency. It's a reign of terror so far as journalism in Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. I think each one of these cases must be taken up seriously as a matter of priority. And the momentum generated by the widespread protests against the assault on NewsClick can and must be used to build a democratic movement that is deeply committed to ensuring that not just the voices of independent and critical journalists, but also their lives, safety, and fundamental liberties guaranteed by the Constitution are protected. And, or we can say that the cause of even one in peril is the cause of all. This kind of spirit, there will be some who will not join this. Everybody knows that. It's always been the case. There are people who will not join this. But the solidarity movements can rely on the participation of a very large number of working journalists, including freelance journalists and those who work on YouTube or social media, other social media platforms. There has been an exodus of some disillusioned journalists from the mainstream. We know that. They have gone and set up their own independent ventures because their voices are suppressed on the major platforms, particularly television channels. And I know a number of people who have left and started their own ventures. This brings us to the key point that freedom of the press is not absolute. And media independence, that's also relative. It's a myth that you can be totally independent. Only a minority of journalists can aspire to do that, but relatively independent so that you are credible information, exercise the critical function, and these two are the central functions. I think if that is done, I think the whole game will change, because right now the government is in a mood to suppress any voices of serious dissent. They're not targeting everyone. Obviously, that would be counterproductive. They are targeting those who they consider create a lot of trouble. Even small ventures like NewsClick or medium-sized ventures like NewsClick if they're targeted. So it's a targeted attack. Or if somebody during the pandemic put out the real story of how many people have died going by the data available in crematoriums, then I think they were targeted. A major Hindi language newspaper and the business interests it was associated with was targeted. Then it began to truthfully report the mortality figures as a result of related to COVID-19. There is one other issue that I don't know if it was discussed today, but I want to flag it. And this is an issue that everybody is talking about internationally when it comes to the likely impact on journalism, namely artificial intelligence. Generative AI, which is developing rapidly, has been characterized by the editor of the Financial Times as the most significant new technology since the advent of the internet. It's widely understood within media organizations that AI's applications and implications for journalism, as well as for major media business operations, will be major and transformative. And there's naturally apprehension among journalists worldwide that generative AI will drastically cut into jobs, even if it does not make journalists obsolete. The realization is growing that AI models on the market are ultimately a prediction engine, learning from the past. They are also known to fabricate facts and make up references and links, and they can be manipulated to produce false images and articles. For example, what are called deep fakes, which are very, very hard to detect. And now research is going on to find ways and means of detecting deep fakes. Moreover, these AI models on the markets can perpetuate, currently on the markets, I would say, because we don't know what's will come in the future. They can perpetuate current prejudices. And several media organizations are now engaged. I know this. I was in China recently to attend the 5th World Media Summit, and we heard from several participants from other countries, particularly developed countries, that several media organizations are now engaged in the process of figuring out ways to put AI to safe and highly regulated use in the newsroom. And the idea or the ideal is to increase productivity and free reporters and editors from irksome grunt work and other low-value tasks while ensuring that original journalism of quality is produced exclusively by humans. This is the ideal. It's easier said than done. And I think there are legitimate apprehensions about what the implications of AI here because of the reasons I mentioned. So exploring and now the problem here is whatever you think about this, you're not going to be able to stop it. Just as you couldn't stop computers from coming in, fear of jobs. Of course, the people behind the new technology will say that new jobs will be created. You'll be displaced from this job, there'll be opportunity elsewhere. This is a very doubtful proposition here when they put this forward. It needs to be studied in depth and whether new opportunities are going to be created. But the problem is, or the point is, whether you like it or not, there is no stopping AI and its applications to the field of journalism and other media business operations. And this will definitely have an impact on jobs. What do you do about it? That's a huge challenge for journalists, their organizations, as well as for the media industry. And we can only hope that sooner than later, some via media or some kind of successful solution can be found. I don't want to end on a note of pessimism. If you read Prabir Purkas's book, I have it here, Keeping Up the Good Fight, from the emergency to the present day, one of the points he makes is there is no bitterness here about in Prabir's voice. And the point he makes is about the emergency, for example, he says the conventional wisdom was people supported the emergency when it happened, subsequently realized it was bad, and when they got the chance through the emergency regime headed by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi out in a peaceful way in the election. And he takes issue with this, saying that what the emergency did for journalists is, or for the people rather, is they developed people of India. They gained confidence. They gained confidence. It empowered them, this whole experience, once they had defeated it. And they realized that you can't take them for granted. This is the point he makes. So it's not a dark picture that we need to face. There are many spaces in India across the media landscape for critical and independent voices to raise themselves, to address issues, and there is such journalism taking place. Sometimes under the radar, if you like. And I think that that's kind of people-oriented journalism. You know the work of what Sainath has been doing, P. Sainath, for many years, along with a number of young journalists, particularly in the state of Maharashtra, but also elsewhere. You know people's movements in Tamil Nadu and Kerala and some of the other southern states where journalists have really reported in a sensitive way people's lives and the challenges, their achievements, their successes, not just painting them as victims of this order, but as people who can make history. And I think these are the spaces that should be strengthened, should be enlarged. And in that sense, no amount of repression will be able to completely suppress, because often you hear that media freedom in India is gone, completely the media are out, and I think we can take issue with that. I haven't touched on the issue of concentration. I just want to make a brief point. I think this is a big danger. Ben Bagdikian documented media monopoly in the United States in a famous book, Media Monopoly. And there have been studies for other countries as well, where ownership of the media is concentrated in a few hands. It's not an absolute monopoly, it's a duopoly, or it's highly concentrated. And in India, we used to say that it is very diverse and pluralistic, to look at it. And a very large number of newspapers, at least those which are registered with the registrar of newspapers, a very large number of, I'm not even going to go into the figures, news television channels, apart from the digital platforms and so on. But other than the digital platforms, which independent journalists are able to operate, beneath this surface plurality and diversity, you have very worrying tendencies of monopolization growing. You'll see it in the Hindi language press, and I think the Reporters Without Frontiers, Without Borders, has made the point that 4 Hindi language newspapers, the top 4, account for something like 80% of the readership. And if you look at, and it's not just in the Hindi-speaking states, in other states, in Maharashtra, Lokmat, in Kerala, Manorama, and in West Bengal, Anand Bazar Patrika, and so on, and you can expand the list to your own research. But I'm not saying that it's total monopolization. It's reached a stage, but so far as the press is concerned. It's also happening on television with concentration by the 2 top industrial houses in this country, and this has also been documented by Reporters Without Borders, that about the media landscape. Just 1 minute. Yeah. This report, the country report brought out in 2023, talking about the political context, makes the point that the Indian press used to be seen as fairly progressive, but things changed radically in the mid-2010s. And particularly after Prime Minister Modi came on the scene and engineered a spectacular rapprochement between his party, the BJP, and the big families dominating the media. That's the political point they're making. And the prime example here cited is the Reliance Industries Group, led by Mukesh Ambani, who owns more than 70 media outlets that are followed by at least 800 million Indians. I'm just reading from this. These facts, these details are to be verified, but they're likely to be, they are credible. And then the takeover of NDTV, end of 2022 by Gautam Adani, again underlines the same point. And the attitude towards journalism now, as a result of this concentration and the nexus that has been established very strongly between the government of the day and the top owners of these highly concentrated media businesses. This is a story in itself which needs to be researched. I think I'll end on this note that these are challenges that face us, but on the bright side, there is some kind of solidarity movement taking shape. The repression has gone too far. The challenges to journalism have gone too far. And I think some kind of awakening and response, fighting response is taking shape. Not yet all over the country, but it's taking shape. And secondly, the number of spaces that are available for people to express their independent and critical voices, to do investigations, to expose misdeeds and so on, to bring people's movements to the fore. The coverage of the farmers' agitation by NewsClick and various other small media organizations, I think had their impact, and they're at least partly responsible for forcing the government to repeal the three anti-people farm laws that were actually repealed. So I think these are some of the bright spots, and on that note, I want to end. I hope this is connected with some of the themes that emerged in your discussions, but if they have not, then I think they may be, I hope this has been of some interest.